Well, greetings and welcome once again to my office here at the Highland Oaks Church of Christ. I'm Pat. Thanks for joining us here as we study the Bible. We just wrapped up a study on the names of God as we journeyed through the way God revealed God's self throughout the Old Testament. And I want to kind of switch back over to the Second Testament or the New Testament. And I want to talk about discipleship. I've been preaching through the Sermon on the Mount for the last few weeks here at the Highland Oaks Church. And the reason we do that is because we call ourselves a church of Christ. And I have this funny feeling that if we're going to call ourselves a church of Christ, we really ought to be looking at the actual words of Christ more regularly. So every year since I've been here at Highland Oaks, I preach through one of the Gospels at the first of the year, or a certain aspect of the Gospels. And this year, I'm doing some themes from the Sermon on the Mount, but one of the things I chose not to do was to go through the Beatitudes there at the beginning of Matthew chapter 5. But I want to do that here. I want to unpack these words that Jesus uses as he begins his most famous sermon. And I was caught this week by what a writer said when he noted that we are drowning in words about following Jesus. We're drowning in words about following Jesus. Some of you may feel like we don't talk about following Jesus nearly enough, and that's probably true. But I would encourage you to get on Amazon and click on the limit there to books and type in "follow Jesus." I found that there were over 6,000 books on following Jesus. I think that's what this writer was referring to when he said we are drowning in words about what it means to follow Jesus. In fact, that's one of the more frustrating things about discipleship, isn't it? The most important thing that we do with our life didn't come with an instruction manual. And we learn about discipleship from people who tell us to go to church or read the Bible, or maybe even, well, it's just something you have to figure out on your own. All well-meaning, sound bites of encouragement, but honestly, if we were to go back and just simply look at the words of Jesus, it might be helpful. That's why I think the Beatitudes are so critical. It's in Matthew chapter 5. It's Jesus's first invitation to those gathering around him. What's interesting about the Sermon on the Mount is that Jesus says very little to disciples other than "follow me" before he gets to the Sermon on the Mount. There's really no teaching, no explanation. It's simply just Jesus walking up to these fishermen saying, "Hey, follow me." And that would be fairly frustrating if I'm reading this story, because there's no talk of forgiveness of sin. There's no talk of the cross. It's simply this invitation to come and to follow. And then we get to this moment in Matthew chapter 5 where Matthew says that Jesus goes and he sits down and he begins to teach them. Now, we can't underestimate that this is a beginning point and that Jesus is teaching. Think about those two images for a second. Beginning. It's like a recipe. Like, for example, when you want to make your own guacamole. Have you ever made your own guacamole? We have this great tradition at our house that just started a couple of months ago, but that's long enough for a tradition, right? Where my wife graciously invited me to make dinner on Monday night. And I was so excited to begin preparing dinner, but then I really wanted to make my own guacamole. So I went to the cupboard and tried to find some ingredients. But you know what you need before you start making guacamole? Avocados. You have to have avocados. Now you may be thinking, well, that's so simple. But you have to begin where the recipe tells you where to begin, which is gathering those things that you really need. I think that's what Jesus is doing here with the Beatitudes. Before we talk about loving our enemy and turning the other cheek, and even teachings about, divorce and worry and money, let's gather these ingredients that we have to make a disciple. This is what Jesus says. He began to speak and taught them, saying, I'm in Matthew chapter 5, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Whew. Such good, strong words that are just ripe for us to really say, Jesus, what did you really mean when you talked about poverty in spirit? What does it mean to be merciful, to be meek, to be a peacemaker? You see, this is what Jesus wanted his disciples to hear first. I can't stress how revolutionary that was to me as I sat with this a few days this week. Jesus doesn't begin by saying, look, I came to forgive you of your sins. Jesus doesn't begin by saying, now let's talk about carrying your cross. Jesus begins by talking to disciples about who they are to become from the inside out. We may be drowning in words of what it means to follow Jesus, but what if we actually looked at the words of Jesus? Every week for the next several weeks, we're going to unpack each one of these Beatitudes and really lean into what Jesus is inviting us to do, but more importantly, who Jesus is inviting us to be. So as I close this introductory lesson, I want us to think about the word blessed for a moment. Jesus says it over again, blessed, blessed, blessed. It's a really rich Greek word that some translators even say happy are those. But, I really don't like the idea of happy because that's some fleeting emotion. And I don't think Jesus is really talking about a fleeting emotion, but rather when Jesus says the word blessed, he's looking at something that God is doing. It begins with God. So in other words, it's not that you are blessed, it's that God is doing the blessing when you have poverty of spirit. God is doing the blessing when you choose to make peace. God is doing the blessing. God is at the center. It's as if Jesus is saying, come and follow me, and let's learn together how God is going to move the world in a different direction. That's what the kingdom agenda is. It's God inviting normal, ordinary people like you, like me, and saying, look, I know the work that you do, but let's figure out how to make that work a work of God and not just work that you might do. That's what Jesus means when he says, I want to teach you how to fish for people. I want you to be blessed. Why? Because it's not something you see on a hat. It's not something you see on a bumper sticker or a t-shirt and you tell people, I am hashtag blessed, but rather it's nothing that you do. It's what God does that you participate in. And this isn't always easy. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it doesn't even make sense. So where do we start with Jesus? Why don't we start right here? Last story. I've been watching Cobra Kai, this great Netflix series about the Karate Kid after the Karate Kid has already happened. If you don't know about the Karate Kid, it was a movie that was made back in the 80s, and it's got one of the most sinister villains, enemies in all movie history with Johnny Lawrence. And of course, Ralph Macchio plays the Karate Kid, and Danny LaRusso, and he does this kick where he beats the enemy. So Cobra Kai is like the adult version of Karate Kid, as these two enemies in high school have grown up and matured into adulthood. But one of the neatest things about the series, the Cobra Kai, is that there's always flashbacks to who the Karate Kid's teacher actually was. And you know who this is? It was an old Japanese karate teacher named Mr. Miyagi. And if you remember back in the first Karate Kid, Daniel LaRusso gets beat up and Mr. Miyagi shows up and really takes over and does karate. And Daniel LaRusso's like, hey, I want to learn how to do that. Can you teach me karate? And instead of Mr. Miyagi teaching Daniel how to go out and kick or how to, really fight back, he hands him a paintbrush. He teaches him how to polish a car. And of course, you know how it goes. He teaches them to wax on and wax off. And you start to wonder, what is Mr. Miyagi up to, teaching him karate by handing him these very mundane work experiences where he's waxing a car or he's painting a fence. What Mr. Miyagi is doing, as you've learned to watch, as you watch the movie, spoiler alert, by the way, is that these are actually the moves that he is going to have as he prepares for the karate fights that he will participate in competition and whatnot. So he's learning how to follow the moves of the master so that he can learn how to have this battle in real life. That's what I think is going on in the Beatitudes. Jesus is saying, come and follow me, but it's not going to look the way you think, but I'm going to teach you the very basic beginning moves so that you can begin to practice and prepare yourself so it can almost become like an instinct. So when it comes time to make peace, when it comes time to be merciful, when it comes time to know how to be pure in heart, you're going to know where to start. I'm so excited that you're going to join us here for these lessons on the Beatitudes, and I'll see you here again next week as we listen to Mr. Miyagi, or Jesus, teach us where to start. Thanks.